see China as a competitor, a vicious, sometimes larcenous competitor, but I don't see them as an enemy who's out to destroy the United States as Russia is. I don't see them as a conquering country, as Russia has done. If China was a conquering country under its dictatorship, which has been in place since 48, there wouldn't be Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we're joined by Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics, including the war in Ukraine and Putin's Russia. Diane, welcome back. Great to see you again. Last time we spoke, Donald Trump appeared to be putting pressure on Vladimir Putin to come to the negotiating table, threatening high taxes, tariffs and sanctions. Now he's strong-arming Ukraine into negotiations by cutting military aid and intelligence sharing. Is this gangster politics?
Well, it's transactional foreign policy. Let's put it that way. It's Trump style. It's not diplomatic. It's strong-arming. And it's about money. Money talks in his world, and so does pressure. So what he's doing is he's trying to get the two to sit down and cut a deal. He's acting as a mediator, and his methods are brutal. I mean, that the dust up in the White House was quite appalling to do to Zelensky. And then, they were angry because he was not willing to sign the minerals deal because he wanted security guarantees. They said that the deal was a security guarantee, which is not true. And so they just worked him over like thugs in an alley. And it was awful. But that also made it very clear to Zelensky he had to apologize. And he had to do whatever he could for his country. So he did that. And Trump got a letter from him on March 3rd or 4th or whatever, read it to the Congress, was very proud of it because he obviously bent the knee and said, we're going to sign with you. We're going to do whatever you want. And then he cut off aid. He cut off military aid and he cut off intelligence sharing to get him to not just apologize, but to get at the table with Putin. And that still exists.
And if we are in a pre-peace talks phase at the moment, the US stated position, unless it's changed, is that it wants Ukraine to retain its sovereignty, to function as a democracy. Russia wants it dissolved, to wipe it off the map. At this moment, it doesn't really seem like there are any peace deals to be had.
Well, no, there isn't. But, when you're a mediator between two sides that hate one another, you've got to do whatever you can. And what you do is you threaten each one of them with severe problems if they don't get to the table and try and start to talk. Now, he's been talking to the Russians, but they've been playing him. They don't want Ukraine at the table because they really don't want a deal. The longer they can stretch this process out, the more inches of ground they're gaining.
Do you think that Donald Trump is an honest broker in this then? Because everything he has said has made it easier so far for Russia to continue the war and harder for Ukraine. Has he changed sides? And if he has, might he change back?
No, he hasn't. I really don't believe it. That's a personal opinion. Some people think he's a KGB operative. I think that's rubbish. And some people say, well, he owes them money. Well, he might, but that's not the reason. He's just trying to strong arm people. If you remember the famous phrase he said to Zelensky, you don't have the cards, you don't have the cards. So he says to Zelensky, you can't win the war and give up the property that you've lost already and let's move on. And to Putin, he's saying, you've got to do this, and that, stop the shooting and so on and so forth. So he's trying to butt their heads together so that they talk. But right now, what the Russians have done is they've dangled a shiny object in front of its face. And I think that that's actually removed the war as a priority when they're sitting down and talking, because they're talking without Ukraine, as you know. And what they're talking about is some kind of grand bargain.
Okay, let's move on to that because you've written about it in your latest Substack, Putin's agenda beyond the negotiating of a truce and how he's played Trump. It comes from the thoughts of a former Russian diplomat, Boris Bondarev. What does he say?
Bondarev quit as a diplomat in Russia after the invasion because he was just so upset about it. And he's very smart. And he was quoted as saying, and I think he's very credible, that what the Russians are doing is stringing along Trump again so the war can be delayed. They can gain inches when it finally stops. And they're dangling this shiny object in front of his face, which is, you know what? Why don't America and Russia cut a deal? We will help you isolate China, and we will help you control Iran and its nuclear program and so on and so forth. They're actually saying that. Now, Trump is thinking this is great. Bondarev says they've changed the subject. This is great. They really think this is interesting. It's stalling for time, but it's also a real offer they're making. But it can't. How credible can it be? How can you possibly believe anything Putin says anyway? Firstly, secondly, to think that Putin would double cross his biggest oil customer, China, is irrational, and to think he would double cross his biggest weapons supplier, Iran, is irrational. So, promising things you cannot do or don't intend to fulfill is a very smart way to just stall. And this seems to be what's happening. And it's horrible because every day 1 or 2 thousand Russian or Ukrainian guys are wounded or die.
Stalling, yes, but Donald Trump is in a big rush himself to get the minerals deal done with Ukraine. And you just said before that you don't believe that this provides any kind of guarantee of security or anything like security for Ukraine. Does the US having a stake in Ukraine in this way not provide anything towards that?
Well, what it does provide is a promise of economic development, a rebuild. They want a piece of the sort of royalties from whatever's produced in resources there, and a shot at producing some of them, in return for which they have this joint fund and they'll rebuild the country. But what's interesting is that by being tough, he's also by being tough on Ukraine on this security business, it has forced the Europeans, led by Britain, to get their act together. Now they're talking about a boots on the ground peacekeeping force, and they're talking about extending nuclear umbrellas, and they're talking about an armed force, and they're talking about spending $80 billion to keep propping up Ukraine. So Trump's difficulty also, he also has been saying to Europe, you don't have any cards either. You're being protected by Ukraine. We've put more money into Ukraine than you have, so you have to take this over. So that is another role of a mediator, is to get all parties to realize what they've got to do and to stop pretending to themselves they don't.
How realistic, though, in reality, is that prospect of British or other European boots on the ground in Ukraine once there is, or after any peace treaty that might be signed? Because that coalition of the willing, it really does depend on a security guarantee, doesn't it? Because nobody is going to want to put their troops into Europe, into Ukraine, at risk being at war with Russia.
Well, that's right. And Russia has not responded yet. They said they don't want anybody from a NATO country with boots on the ground in Ukraine because they'll regard that as a provocation. What has to happen is, if it could be European peacekeepers on the ground, but it has to be American intel sharing, because they control the skies. They know what's going on. And in this type of warfare, it's really not about armed combat, mano a mano. It's about a drone finding you, hunting you, and shooting your head off. So you need all of that radar and all that electronics backup, and all that intel sharing that only the Americans can provide to even protect your peacekeepers. So yes, there's an implicit requirement that America get involved. Right now, everybody's shouting and doesn't like each other. And so this is a particularly sticky time. But I must say that I think Starmer has been very great in pushing, and Macron is coming through. And now, of course, we have a very good outcome in the German elections. Merz sounds like the right kind of guy. He wants an army. He's lifted debt ceiling problems so that Germany can open up its coffers. Germany has been a big laggard, and looks like they finally get it.
The incoming German leader, then, Friedrich Merz, who you mentioned there, he has signaled this upscaling of the armed forces in Germany, whatever it takes approach he's launching. What does the return of German leadership actually bring to Europe, do you think?
Well, money. I mean, look, Germany messed up the last century. twice, and they're not particularly loved or respected. They've been very good in the recent post-war period. They've been generous, but they have been, they have a constitution that has forbidden an army from leaving its borders and from rearming. Now they have to pony up along with the other Europeans because they're the big wallet. They're the biggest wallet in Europe, and they are not. They have an army that's tiny, and they've got to do something. And so it looks like they're finally realizing, okay, we're going to join you. We're going to pull our weight.
But what he's articulated is that Europe needs to be independent of Washington. That the current administration, he claims, is largely indifferent to the fate of Europe and of Ukraine. Ironically, you could say that Donald Trump is going to, or could end up being, the great unifier of Europe.
He absolutely is, and he's done that for NATO as well. Great point. The Americans have been bearing the brunt financially for NATO, and they've been bearing the brunt financially for safeguarding Europe on the ground. Tens of thousands of troops still there. And so they don't want to do it anymore. They want to look after their own needs. As one commentator said today, while the Europeans keep expanding their excessively generous social safety net for their people, we're paying for them to be protected. And that's we want a little social safety net for ourselves. So we're cutting back. And so Trump has been on this tear for a long time, and I think Japan and South Korea are going to get the brunt too.
You say that he's unifying NATO as well. Why do you say that? Is it because of the pressure he's put on to up defence spending individual alliance members? Because there is the question mark over whether or not Article 5 will still be honoured.
Well, yes, and when I say he's been good for NATO, it's in a negative way. It's got everybody frightened that the big boy, who everybody was really secretly counting on anyway, had there been some problems, was disaffected, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's the fear of Trump that has got them scrambling around in Brussels today to get together and form an armed forces. And Britain has led the charge for this, because Britain has been saying this for a long time. Now, as far as Article 5, it seems to me that some of the stuff that we know Russia's been doing in the Baltic Sea, cutting cables. I mean, Estonia lost all of its internet connects and this sort of thing, and all the cyber attacks and sabotage and all the shenanigans that Russia has visited upon the European Union. Many of those could have been Article 5 violations, and I would argue are, which would have invoked Article 5. Now, a friend of mine who's an international lawyer and took me through the Article 5. The Article 5 is not one for all and all for one. You can opt out of it, or it still goes ahead. So it wasn't as ironclad a unifier as I thought it was. And of course, this is another problem.
Western Europe has woken up, I think you'd agree. Emmanuel Macron talks of being prepared for the US not to stand by as a guarantor of its security, talks of a crossroads in history. And we're talking on Thursday afternoon, there is an EU emergency summit ongoing as we speak. And it is addressing the urgent need to ramp up defense spending, production as well, along with support for Ukraine. How quickly do you think Western Europe in particular, but the whole of Europe in general, might make up for lost time?
Oh, I've got to think minimum months. This is not something you do quickly. I don't even know how you go about it. It's cumbersome. 30 countries, different languages. I mean, it's and different appetites for getting involved in it. I mean, this will be kind of quasi voluntary. Obviously, the Brits and the French are going to participate in the Polish and the Baltics, but how much is Italy going to get involved, or Spain, or Germany? So, and I think the Scandinavians can be counted on too. But to pull it together and keep it together, and then equip it is going to be quite a task. It's going to take a long time.
How dangerous a moment do you think this is for Ukraine?
It's no more dangerous than every day has been since February 2022. I mean, the most dangerous moment was the day they invaded. Who would have thought? And they mustered, I wrote a Substack then because I know the Ukrainians, and I quoted Zelensky, who became the head of the military, and I said, that it was entitled "Mr. Putin, Every Window Will Shoot," and that's what they've done. There is not a man, woman, or child in that country who has not been inducted and conscripted into fighting the good fight, and they've paid an enormous price. And now they have an army bigger than Britain's and bigger than France's, and it's state of the art, and it's reinvented warfare because of their technological brilliance. It's a drone warfare, and they also have built a sizable military industrial complex themselves, which is something Europe is also going to have to do. But in the meantime, the Americans will gladly sign contracts to sell weapons to Europeans for Ukrainians' use. But they are a remarkable people, and they have put up a miraculous effort militarily.
And they have demonstrated time and time again what can be done under duress when you're fighting an existential fight. It does feel that right now it is a time for radical ideas and radical strategies. People are raising all kinds of ideas to finally release those $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. A new leader has also been mentioned for Ukraine as a possibility, or even to go to the Chinese with the minerals deal. The last of which I'm told is very unlikely and not a great idea. What are the chances of the other two or any of those ideas? And do you have any radical ideas?
No, I think the mineral idea was a brilliant idea, and it was suggested first by Zelensky's government. They approached the Americans saying, "Hey, we approve. Let's do business together, and that can be, and then we can help finance the rebuild and finishing off the war." So it was a good idea because, and then it also was an implicit security guarantee. But you really do need the boots on the ground. So we're here where we are. I think that things are unfolding as they should. The Europeans, I think, will get their act together because they have to. I think the new leader in Germany is great news for Macron and Starmer and Poland. And unfortunately, the war is not going to end. I don't think Trump can get anybody to the table. Right now, he's holding Ukraine hostage by still denying intel sharing and military aid, even though he said he wants to cooperate and sign the deal and go to the table. So I don't know what's going on there, but every day that lingers, more ground is taken and more people die. So I think that it's going to be more of the same. Is it dangerous? Yes, but it has been since 2022.
Let's talk about Trump's war. It's his trade war. His tariff war has provoked Chinese into some very strong rhetoric that they're ready for a tariff war. They say a trade war or any other type of war, and they'll fight to the end. How can Ukraine mitigate the fact that the stark truth is Trump's number one priority is China?
Yes, he thinks it's more dangerous than Russia, which I disagree about. But I'm speaking to you now from the 51st state. I'm in Toronto, Canada. We're caught in the crossfire too, and people are plenty angry here. And our politicians are, scrambling to bail out companies. And the latest of which is that the automobile plants, which prop up the province of Ontario, which is the biggest economy in Canada, are mostly American owned, and Trump wants them to vacate and move all their workers and equipment and their productivity to the United States again. So this is a existential threat for the Canadian economy, and so he's thrown his weight around everywhere, and it's very, very worrisome.
Why do you think Trump is wrong in thinking that China's more dangerous than Russia?
I see China as a competitor, a vicious, sometimes larcenous competitor, but I don't see them as an enemy who's out to destroy the United States as Russia is. I don't see them as a conquering country, as Russia has done. If China was a conquering country under its dictatorship, which has been in place since '48, there wouldn't be Southeast Asia. China's also been invaded by Russia in the 60s and 70s, and they're frightened of Russia. And one person said actually the Great Wall was built in China to keep the Russians out. So, China just wants to make money have fun and be successful and
But maybe take back Taiwan.
maybe take back Taiwan. But that I think will be the next thing that Trump will attempt to do, and that is to get them to sign a deal saying they're not going to invade Taiwan.
That'll be interesting to see how he manages to do that. Maybe the tariffs have something to do with it.
I think so. Tariffs are persuasive.
Just to go back to Ukraine, if the ultimate choice is between capitulation or fighting on without US support, the latter might be the least bad option. But what then for ending the war? How do you see it progressing?
Well, the Americans have paused the intel sharing and the military aid, but they will bring it back once, they say, once Ukraine gets to the actual table and a date is set and they're all sitting down and talking. That's what they're saying. That could be days, that could be months. But capitulation is not in their DNA. They're not going to capitulate. They're angry, and many of them probably would rather die than be Russian again because it's an awful regime. So I think that the table will be set. They'll sit down and talk. That'll drag on. The aid will start to flow again from the United
Yeah,
States.
on the military aid, actually, I'm a little bit unsure right now as we're speaking as to whether or not it has been switched on, because there are some murmurings that it has, and there were certainly signals being sent out to say that it will be short-lived. So either way, fingers crossed, that really was just like a 1 or 2 or 3 day thing. Um, yeah, the second presidency of Donald Trump, I mean, it really has, if you take a step back, injected unpredictability and chaos to international relations. It's going to have an impact on the alliances that have undermined and have been undermined as a result, and also the autocracies that have been emboldened. I mean, do you think that this trajectory is something that will live on beyond his administration, or it's something where people like tighten their belts and sort of live through the next few years and say things will stabilize afterwards? Or do you think we are really entering into a new area and we better get used to it?
Well, Trump has reconstituted all the relationships between America and every ally and enemy on the planet. That's what he's done. And he's reconstituted them in favor of the United States. I remember interviewing Bill Clinton at Davos years ago, and he had a very cute phrase. I said, what was it like to take the Oval Office for the first few weeks? He said, the first few weeks, you have hundreds of leaders of countries coming in front of you, asking you to be a policeman or Santa Claus. Okay. Trump doesn't want to be Santa Claus and he doesn't want to be a cop. He wants America to be first. He wants America to, in all of its relations, get the better end of the deal. And that's what he's doing right now. He's reconstituting the world order. And it's not just going to be about Europe. I don't think it's going to be, actually, in the long run, it may be good for Europe to take care of itself and to unify even more and to help protect Ukraine. And Ukraine will be the policeman that guards Europe until it gets its own armed forces. So you have a strengthening somewhat there, a resilience building there. China is a whole other topic, but he's softening them up because high tariffs of 60% are going to crush their economy, which is already struggling.
What are your friends and your contacts in Ukraine telling you about the last couple of weeks? Because it's been politically a very dramatic and concerning time, but also, the war rages on. People are dying every day, and Russia, in spite of what's happening, is targeting civilians.
Well, I have a friend who's a computer scientist, and she's a politician in Ukraine. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, every night I take my 2 rescue puppies and my cat, and I sleep under the basement stairs because we sleep together because they're frightened of hearing the bombs all night. That's her life.
Diane, what are you looking to look at for your Substacks in the coming days? I mean, what are the things that you're keenly interested to see and to understand in the developments that we're witnessing at the moment?
Well, all roads lead through Trump. So whatever he's up to, I think that we're going to see. I don't think Ukraine and Europe is quite done yet, but we see the trajectory where that's going. And I think it's on the whole positive, and I wish it happened tomorrow, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. I think China is okay at the moment. And I think that the next big disruption will be in the Western Hemisphere, not only pushing Canada and Mexico around economically, but sorting out the cancer in cancer in the Western Hemisphere is really the cartels, and he's declared war against the drug cartels who have been smuggling people and fentanyl and so on into Canada as well as the United States. And they are powerful. Some of them are as big as countries in revenue, and I think that you're going to see some very tough military action taken and threatened because these cartels, particularly the Sinaloa in Mexico, out of Colombia and Mexico, have now taken control over most of the countries in Central America, Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela. And that cannot be allowed to continue. So stay tuned for that one.
That'll be interesting to see it when you write it up. But just to return to Ukraine to finish now, what are you expecting and what are you keen to see in the coming days?
I think they will get down to the table. I think that something will happen. I think there'll be a truce, a ceasefire of some kind in coming weeks, I hope, because Putin has to know that he's got Europe eventually also against him, and I hope that then the rebuilding can start with peacekeepers on the ground. Ukraine is not going to get the land back that was stolen since 2014, and that's a given, I'm afraid, and that's very sad. But they can rebuild themselves into an amazing country because they were before.
And Diane Francis, thank you so much for your time. Good to speak to you again.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.